Welcome to Taste Buds. I'm Debra Eckerling, goal strategist, writer, and foodie. And today I'm speaking with Chef Judi Leib, founder of Whisk in the Southern. Great to see you, Judi. Thanks for joining me.
Great to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Deborah.
I love the name Whisk in the Southern. So let's start there. Where did that come from?
Well, I was born and raised in Southern California, but my mother's whole side of the family and my mother are from Georgia. And I didn't realize until I had my own children just how heavily influenced by a Southern upbringing I was. My kids would have grits for breakfast. We always had a pound cake on the counter. We always had chicken salad in the refrigerator. But it wasn't until I had kids and they went off to school that I found out that wasn't really the norm.
Oh, did they get like comments on their lunch?
Well, or people would they'd have a friend come over for sleepover and they'd be like, "What are grits?" How do you explain grits? Sort of cream of wheat, but it's cream of corn.
Okay, that totally makes sense. So you decided to create this blog that was like the compilation of both Souths that influence you.
Right, exactly. Because there are so many foods that, the Southern food has a reputation of maybe not being the healthiest, but here we are in California with all this wonderful fresh food and produce and lifestyle. So how can I kind of make them mesh a little bit better? So maybe fried chicken is a baked chicken.
Ah, so it's still chicken, but it's California chicken,
And I still
right?
marinate it in buttermilk with a ton of seasonings overnight, and I still got the flour in it too, but I instead of sticking it in a vat of oil, I put it in the oven.
Yeah, definitely way more Californian. And so where did that love of cooking come from?
My mom was a very good cook, but didn't like to cook. And my godmother was, in fact, a fabulous chef and loved to cook and teach a lot. So that's, I think, from both of them. And certainly, the women in my family have always been good cooks.
So it was hereditary.
Yes, for sure. For sure. But I've been cooking since I was 2 years old. My mother will tell you that she came into the kitchen one morning and there was a cast iron skillet with a dozen broken eggs in it. And she was screaming, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Well, I'm making breakfast." So,
So you started young,
yes, very much so.
probably a little younger than most. And so you're a trained chef.
Yes, I went to culinary school.
And was it just because you were like, I love this, I want this to be my life, or was there a different aha that went into that?
No, I always wanted to go to culinary school. My parents were, very old fashioned. And my dad was like, you have to have a 4-year degree first. I still to this day think to myself, wow, would I have been Bobby Flay if I had just gone straight to culinary school and not taken my time to go to a 4-year university? Um, Unfortunately, my father passed away. And when he did, and my mom said, okay, it's time for everybody can pay for their own education. You all have inheritance now. I was out the door. I went right to culinary school and I loved it.
Some good came from
Yes.
sad.
Yes.
So what are some things that you know as a trained chef that home cooks need to know to elevate their cooking?
I think the first thing is there's a few things, but the first thing is I always tell people, please be fearless in your kitchen because if you can read a recipe, you can cook, right? And I think people read so much into like, oh, you're a chef, that kind of thing. So be fearless in your kitchen. Don't be afraid to experiment. Julia Child had a quote, never make any excuses for your food because if it's bad, everybody in the room already knows. You don't need to make an excuse for it, right? But also I tell people if it smells good together, it will more than likely taste good together because we taste with our nose first. And that was certainly something that I didn't know until I went to culinary school. So when somebody walks into a house where onions are being sauteed and they're like, oh, it smells so good in here. But then they're the person at the dinner table that says, oh, I don't like onions. Well, yeah, you do.
Oh, it's like tricking people to liking onions. So what are some good aromas that go good together that people wouldn't necessarily combine?
Hmm. That's a good one. I personally, well, I'll give you a classic one. You know, like in Chinese cooking, there's a lot of peanut sauces. Chinese cooking, Thai cooking. You would not typically think of peanut butter for a sauce, if you weren't like into Asian cooking, if you hadn't, experimented in Chinese restaurants or Thai restaurants here. But if you're holding a really good piece of nicely seared chicken breast and peanut butter, they're not offensive, right? It's not, you don't go, right? So I think that's like a great place to start, like, apples and peanut butter. You wouldn't typically think about that, but they do go well together, and if you think about smelling them. So
Now, I do love some nice peanut chicken. So
yes.
so you got me on that one, and I'm thinking, I have chicken, I have peanut butter. I can actually like after this conversation create something peanut butter chickeny.
Right. And think about it this way. You can throw in an acid, right? Peanut butter is a very rich fat. So you want to throw in some sort of acid to cut that. That's where like soy sauce or amari sauce comes in, right? Because now you've got that salty, you've got that sweet, that fat, and then you've got the acid that's going to cut the fat.
Ooh, fun. I like
Yeah.
that. Okay, so something else that I know you love are gadgets.
Yes.
So do you and I'm gonna ask you to play favorites again. Do you have a gadget that's like your go-to? You use it for like almost everything.
I use it. Some people call it a rasp, RASP. Some people call it a microplane. It's a very thin, long, almost knife looking grater. I grate my lemon zest on that. I grate my ginger on that. The other day I was making a cake and I grated some chocolate on it. And it's a great tool. It's just so universal. You can grate Parmesan cheese on it.
So it's grating holes, or is it like a slide?
Yeah,
What it? Tell me.
it looks like a
Mm-hmm.
grater box, like the small side, like the small shavings, and it's about this wide, and you hold it on a handle like a knife. So
Mm-hmm.
it's super easy to use.
Okay. I think I have. Well, I always thought it was a small grater,
Yeah,
but now you're telling me it's something else that is like much fancier
right. It
of a
could
tool.
be, yeah, right. There's lots of names, but yeah, it's the same thing. You can use it for nutmeg, you can use it for cinnamon if you're grating fresh cinnamon sticks. There's a lot of ways to use it. So in some places it's called a rasp, other places you can find it as a microplane.
Okay, well, now I know the fancy name for that tool, and now I'm gonna use it more because I think it's gonna make me feel
Absolutely.
like a fancier chef, right?
There you go. There you go.
What are some other sorts of chefy tips that people who love to cook, who wanna love to cook more, can do to just elevate?
Um,
Does it sound like I watch too many cooking shows because I keep saying the word elevate? 'Cause that's what it sounds like to me.
I think, first of all, I would tell people read your recipe all the way through before you ever get started, because there's nothing worse than getting halfway through a recipe and maybe thinking, oh, I know I have sour cream, and maybe not having enough sour cream because maybe the sour cream's divided in half or whatever, right? So read your recipe all the way through, make sure you have all of your ingredients and all of your equipment ready to go before you start a recipe. One of the things I love to do, and this came up for me, I was at a bar mitzvah many, many years ago. As a matter of fact, I'm going to the kid's wedding in a few weeks.
Wow.
Um, and his dish that they served at his bar mitzvah was a Chilean sea bass that was encrusted in panko breadcrumbs and fresh herbs served over a lemon beurre blanc. That is a very fancy dish. But what if you wanted to make that? Everybody eats Chilean sea bass now. It's available readily in the markets. What if you wanted to eat that without going to the trouble of making a lemon beurre blanc? Well, perhaps you could put some lemon slices over that Chilean sea bass, dot it with butter, wrap it up in parchment paper, and bake it, right? Super easy. But then maybe you have fresh herbs that you grow in your yard or your kitchen window. Chop those up, sprinkle those right over. And again, you can put the herbs in the panko breadcrumbs, encrust your sea bass, and you're still baking it off. And if you know how to, you can make a lemon beurre blanc. So there's always a way to take a recipe, a simple recipe, and just kind of notch it up a little bit.
And not be so intimidated by fancy names.
Right, right, right. You can say panko breadcrumbs, or you can just say Japanese breadcrumbs, which is what they are.
Right, exactly. But
Yeah.
it sounds like really fancy, but the way you described it, it's like no brainer, no problem.
Right. Deconstruct your recipes before you make them, like deconstruct them in your mind. A lemon sea bass over a lemon beurre blanc. There's lemon, there's butter, there's herbs, there's sea bass. Those ingredients are very simple, and panko breadcrumbs. Those are very simple ingredients. So now you see that if I'm using those ingredients in a different way, I can either elevate it or make it a weeknight dinner.
Nice. And so what's the difference between making something fancy?
I don't think there's a
Is it
lot of
is it like the wine glass that's next to I don't know.
I think it's I think it's welcoming people to your table.
Mhm.
There's a big difference between a weeknight dinner when it's you and your husband, you and your significant other, you're in your family, whatever, and a Saturday night dinner where you welcome friends and extended family into your home, right? So I think that's the biggest difference. But again, like you said, it's asking yourself, how can I take this recipe and elevate it? What makes it, if I'm using the same ingredients, maybe New York Times has their New York Times cooking section has a no recipe section, right? So you can just put in your ingredients and it'll shoot back to you what you want to make. I think those are a lot of great options when you're, playing around on the internet.
And I agree with you. I think that the recipe is your friend, but where do you say, "Oh, I know better than the recipe." Do you ever get to that point? Or is that just something that intimidates people and they never do?
Um, I think you can get to that point. Like the difference between cooking and baking. In cooking, you have a lot more freedom, right? Because, and I have this on my Instagram, I give tips on how to, like, if it's too salty, add a potato. If it's too fat, add an acid, that kind of thing. So when you're cooking, you can throw stuff in. There's a lot more forgiveness. When you're baking, there's a lot less forgiveness with the actual chemistry of like baking soda, salt, flour, fat, that kind of thing. Um, and you can add in like some add-ins like chocolate chips and banana bread, that kind of thing, without going too far off the grid. But everything just takes practice and be willing to make a mistake.
So let's talk about baking because I know you like that as well. Do you have like a signature cake or cookies or whatever?
I do. I actually make a chocolate chip cookie that it's the one recipe I don't share, which is so funny. People are like, it's a chocolate chip cookie recipe. I'm like, yes, but once you've had my chocolate chip cookies, you will understand why I don't share the recipe, because I don't want everybody duplicating them. And that is a very good recipe. I happen to love, being from the South, I love red velvet cake and I love pound cakes. I think pound cakes are the greatest thing in the world because they're so easy and you can do so many things with them. So I make a pound cake that instead of using buttermilk as my liquid slash acid, I use pineapple juice. It doesn't really taste pineapple-y, but there's a freshness and a sweetness to it that you can't really peg. I love to do that when there's something that you can't really peg in the recipe.
And do you think you would be kind enough to share that one? Because I know better than to ask for the chocolate chip.
I will definitely share with you the pound cake recipe. And pound cake is in fact, that. So I think it's 5 eggs and 3 cups of flour, 2 cups of sugar. Um, it's really easy. I can certainly send you that and you can link it in the show notes.
I would love that because my big pet peeve, and we probably talked about this before we went on air, is listening to or watching cooking shows and they don't give you the recipe.
Right.
And so all of my shows have some recipe in some form or another because when you talk about the food, you just really want to try it.
Yeah, for sure.
And even if it's not perfect, as you said, mistakes are fine. Well,
Yeah.
mistakes when it's still edible are fine,
Mistakes are how you learn, right? If you
right?
make, I was in a restaurant in Vegas many, many years ago, and they had a beet soup that was not borscht, and it was out of this world delicious. And I asked the chef for the recipe. Now he was very gracious to give me the ingredients, but not the recipe, not the amounts and everything. So you just kind of, it's a trial type of thing with that kind of stuff. I love to do that too. I love to go into restaurants and have something and come home and recreate it.
Oh, that sounds like a fun little game, and then you could
Yeah,
be like, is it or
exactly.
even if you get, like, leftovers of a something, and then is it me it to compare the flavors
Right, for sure,
to
for
try and
sure.
test it.
Yeah, yeah.
I feel like that should be wait, no, there probably is. a game show, right? Where they reconnect, where they try and recreate. I know there's one where they try and recreate Instagram famous desserts,
Oh,
and then
wow.
they always show them side by side
Oh, yeah.
because why not? And some of them are really on the money, but others of them are like, "Gee, I hope it tastes good." Right?
Exactly,
Because
yeah.
isn't that what it comes down to? Is there one thing that you know now that you wish you knew when you started cooking? I know you started early, so whenever
Is there
that makes
one
sense.
I think that it's the patience, right? So, when you make a recipe, read the whole recipe all the way through. Like, you might just read the ingredients, but then you get to the instructions if you're not prepared, right? So read the ingredients. Take the time, right? If it says, like on challah, if it says need for 8 to 10 minutes, knead it for 8 to 10 minutes. Take the time, because I think patience really makes a big difference in food. If for no other reason, I think stress comes through in your recipes, you know?
Yes.
So I would think patience is something. When I wanted to go to culinary school when I was very young, and my parents said, "No, you have to get a 4-year degree." Immediately after I came out, and I went to a great culinary school, but I didn't go to CIA, the Culinary Institute. And the reason I didn't is because I was accepted, but they demand, at least they did back then, that you have 2 years experience in a restaurant before you ever come to the school. Well, I was in a hurry. I was in
Mhm.
a and so I found another school, and it was a very good school, but imagine what I could have done if I had actually taken that time, that patience.
And it's such a good lesson for, like, cooking and life.
Yes,
So, in cooking, I think it does, it breeds a lot of really good, like, lessons like that, and also to read the instructions before you get started
right.
because, and I know I've run down the street to, like, get a potato because I thought I had enough,
Yep.
and I didn't, so it's like, "Okay, let's is the recipe okay? Can I run down and get the ingredients that you're missing?" So,
Right.
looking at the big picture and planning ahead saves you so much time in the
Absolutely.
long run.
Absolutely. For sure.
Well, this has been wonderful conversation. Love your insight and your take, and I absolutely really love pairing patience and cooking because I think that's one of the joys of cooking is that you get to be disconnected while
Right.
you're doing it so you can be fully present.
Right.
Where can people find you, learn more about you, get your recipes and tips?
So I have an Instagram, and across all social media, it's at Whisk in the Southern. And I have a website, whiskinthesouthern.com. And you can find me on pretty much any of those platforms, any social media, and then my website. My website's great. And I have a blog there. Once you get to my website, I have a newsletter that comes out once a month where I do like my tip of the month, my recipe of the month. I have a quiz, like not a quiz, but like a poll of the month. What do you want to learn? And I teach a dinner party series that they can go sign up for on my website as well, where I'm teaching you how to be a host and a guest at your own dinner party.
Which is perfect because you're making all this food, you're bringing people together. You need to enjoy it. I mean, why
Right,
not enjoy it, right?
exactly, and that's probably the number one question I get. Well, how do you get everything on the table at the same time? How are you not standing in the kitchen the whole night? What's the difference for you? And there are definitely ways. There are tips for getting that done.
Okay, can you tease one of them?
I already told you, read your recipe all the way through, and you back out your time of your recipes. So if you have a recipe that's 45 minutes and a recipe that's an hour and a recipe that's an hour and 15 minutes, which one are you making first?
I know the answer. It's the hour and 15 minutes, and
Right,
then the hour, and then
exactly.
the 45, and so when you're planning ahead, you know how to time everything just right.
Right, exactly, exactly.
Love practical examples. Thank you so much, Judi Leib, for joining me. And thank you for tuning in to Taste Buds with Deb. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform. And you can go to jewishjournal.com to get recipes and read the articles to go with each episodes. You can also learn more at tastebudswithdeb.com. And until next time, enjoy your food.